When I first saw it, I couldn't help but chuckle. They called it the Jug, a flying milk jug, a lumbering beast that looked more like a delivery truck than a fighter plane. I'm Tom Harris, a young pilot fresh out of training, posted to a squadron based near the sleepy town of Cambridge in the spring of 1943. The war in Europe had been raging for years, and the skies were ruled by the sharp, nimble fighters of the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, who fancied themselves the kings of the clouds. Their machines were sleek, fast, and deadly, and here I was, staring at a monstrosity that seemed to defy everything I'd learned about dogfighting. The plane was the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, and when it first arrived at our base, the experienced pilots weren't shy about their opinions. "That thing? It's a joke," they said, shaking their heads. I have to admit, I agreed. It was enormous, weighing nearly twice as much as the German planes we'd be facing. Its cockpit was cavernous, spacious enough to fit in a comfy chair, but the controls felt sluggish, the plane slow to respond. When I climbed aboard for the first time, the pilot's seat felt more like sitting in a tank than a fighter. The nickname Jug stuck instantly, and it wasn't hard to see why. Our first missions were rough. The radios kept cutting out. I once tried to call for backup, but all that came through was static and the faint sound of someone humming a tune from the local pub. We took off for a patrol over northern France, and I remember gripping the controls, trying not to think about the sleek Messerschmitts we were bound to meet. The Luftwaffe pilots had already laughed us off as clumsy amateurs with our oversized tin can. To them, this was an easy target, a slow-moving prize. But as we climbed higher, something strange happened. The air grew thin and cold, and while their planes started to struggle, the Jug seemed to awaken. Its engine, a massive Pratt & Whitney R2800, roared with a power that felt like a thunderclap. I pushed the throttle forward, and suddenly, our lumbering giant was surging ahead, faster than I'd expected, slicing through the sky like a knife through butter. The first encounter was nerve-wracking. As a flight of German fighters swooped in to trap us in a tight-turning dogfight, I felt the Jug's weight pulling me down. I knew we were at a disadvantage here. This wasn't the plane's fight. But then I remembered what our commander had told us. Don't try to dance with a heavyweight boxer. Use your power, hit hard, and get out fast. So I climbed, higher and higher, until the sun was a burning glare above me, and the enemy was mere specks far below. Then, with a sudden dive, the Jug transformed. Gravity took hold, and our speed skyrocketed. I hurtled down like a guided missile, guns blazing. 8.50 caliber machine guns unleashed a relentless wall of lead, and I saw one of those sleek German fighters burst into flames before I even pulled up. The Luftwaffe's laughter would soon turn to fear. But that's just the beginning of the Jug's story, and as I sit here, nursing a coffee in a chilly English mess hall, I can't shake the feeling that the war in the skies is about to get a whole lot more brutal. Something about this plane, this engine, this machine, feels unstoppable. And the Germans are about to find out the hard way. Yet, as I watch the horizon darken with incoming clouds, I wonder, what new secrets does the Jug still hold? And what will happen when the real battle begins? The morning fog hung low over our airfield near Cambridge, cloaking the rows of thunderbolts like ghostly sentinels waiting for their orders. I was still trying to get used to the Jug's weighty presence, but there was no time for hesitation. Today was my first real combat mission, and the tension in the squadron was thick enough to cut with a knife. Our briefing was held in a cramped, dimly lit room where maps were spread across the table like a battlefield chessboard. Squadron leader Captain James Hawk Reynolds was a man who commanded respect, tall, with steel-gray eyes that seemed to pierce right through you. His uniform was crisp, and his boots polished to a gleam. He wore a leather jacket slung casually over his shoulders, and a silver watch glinted on his wrist. "Listen up," he said, voice low but steady. "The Germans have been hitting our bomber formations harder than ever. Our job is to escort the B-17s and keep those fighters off their tails. The Jug might not be the prettiest bird in the sky, but it's got more firepower and armor than they can chew through. Don't get tangled in a turning fight. Climb high, dive hard, and remember, speed is your friend." I nodded, though inside, my nerves were doing backflips. The other pilots were already suited up, some checking their gear, others sharing jokes to mask their own anxiety. There was one pilot who caught my eye, a striking figure named Sarah Mitchell. She was the squadron's top mechanic and unofficial morale officer. Today, she wore a fitted olive-green jumpsuit zipped halfway down, revealing a hint of a white tank top beneath. Her dark hair was tied back in a loose ponytail, and a pair of aviator goggles rested on her forehead. She flashed a grin as I approached. "Ready to dance with the jug, rookie?" she teased, tossing me a wrench like a good luck charm. I laughed, grateful for the distraction. More like trying not to get squashed by it. She winked. "Just remember, it's not about finesse. It's brute force and brains. The jug doesn't care if you're graceful. It's here to punch hard and keep punching." As I climbed into my cockpit, the familiar hum of the powerful engine filled my ears. I strapped in, feeling the reassuring bulk of the armor plating around me. The throttle responded with a deep rumble, and as we taxied onto the runway, I caught a glimpse of Sarah watching from the sidelines, her hands on her hips, a confident smile on her lips. The sky was a steel gray canvas as we took off, the Thunderbolts lumbering into formation behind the bombers. I gripped the controls tighter as we soared higher, the cold air biting through the canopy. Suddenly, chatter crackled over the radio. Enemy fighters incoming. The tension snapped like a live wire. At first, the Luftwaffe pilots tried their usual tricks, darting in for tight turns, hoping to trap us in a deadly waltz. But we weren't about to give them the satisfaction. I pushed the jug into a steep climb, the engine roaring with a ferocity I'd never experienced. Above 25,000 feet, the plane came alive, agile, swift, and deadly. Then came the dive. I felt the G-forces slam into me as we plummeted toward our targets, the wind roaring past like a freight train. My fingers danced over the trigger, unleashing a torrent of tracer rounds. One German fighter caught the onslaught, its fuselage erupting in flames. The sky was suddenly a chaotic ballet of smoke trails and exploding engines. When I pulled up, heart pounding, I caught sight of the wreckage falling away below. The jug had done its job. We circled back, climbing again for another pass. The German pilot's confidence was fading, their laughter replaced by the crackle of desperation. Back on the ground, Sarah was waiting, a spark of excitement in her eyes. "Not bad for your first rodeo," she said, brushing a smudge of grease from her cheek. "But this war's just getting started. The jug's got more tricks up its sleeve." I nodded, already feeling the weight of the battles ahead. The sky was no longer just a battlefield. It was a proving ground, where strength, will, and machine would collide in a deadly dance. And somewhere out there, the Luftwaffe's greatest ace was watching, waiting to test the jug, and me. But what no one knew yet was that beneath the jug's steel shell, a secret was humming, a hidden power that could change the course of the war. And when that secret was unleashed, the skies over Europe would never be the same again. The sun was just breaking over the horizon as I stepped out of the squadron barracks, the crisp morning air carrying the faint scent of damp earth and burning fuel. Today, the war felt closer than ever. We'd been hearing whispers of a new German ace prowling the skies, a pilot whose skill and ruthlessness had earned him the nickname Black Talon. The name alone sent a chill down my spine. Rumor had it he flew a sleek, black-painted Focke-Wulf 190 that could outturn and outdive just about anything the Allies had. And he wasn't shy about leaving wreckage in his wake. I made my way to the hangar where my jug waited, its bulky frame gleaming beneath the dull morning light. The plane looked less like a fighter and more like a flying fortress, its wings heavy with the promise of firepower. As I ran my fingers along the polished metal, I thought about the contrast between the jug and the nimble German fighters, the Black Talon included. Theirs were like hunting falcons, quick and precise. Ours? A heavyweight boxer with a mean right hook. Sarah was already there, crouched by the engine, tightening bolts with practiced hands. She looked up as I approached, flashing that signature grin that somehow mixed mischief with steel resolve. Today, she'd swapped her usual olive jumpsuit for a faded leather jacket over a snug white blouse, and her hair was pulled into a messy bun that gave her a rakish charm. A silver locket hung at her neck, catching the light briefly. "Ready to tango with the Talon?" she teased. I smirked. "If he's half as fast as they say, I'm going to need more than luck." She shrugged, tightening the last screw. "Luck's overrated. Remember, the Jug's got endurance and firepower. Let him come to you." I climbed into the cockpit, settling in beneath the bubble canopy that gave me a clear, almost panoramic view of the sky. The controls felt familiar now, the engines rumble a steady heartbeat beneath me. As I taxied to the runway, I caught sight of the other pilots preparing for takeoff, their faces tight with anticipation. Once airborne, the sky above the English countryside stretched out like a vast, endless ocean. We climbed steadily, the cold biting through my flight jacket, as the mission brief replayed in my mind. Escort the bombers to their target over northern France and keep the Luftwaffe fighters at bay. Then the radio crackled to life. "Bandits at 2 o'clock high," came the sharp voice of our lead pilot. My heart leapt. I banked left, scanning the sky. Sure enough, dark specks appeared against the pale blue, growing larger by the second. And then, through the haze, I saw him, the Black Talon. His jet-black Focke-Wulf sliced through the air with deadly grace, wings tipped like the claws of a predator. I swallowed hard. This was no ordinary fight. He dived toward us, fast as a striking snake. The other Jugs scattered, trying to avoid his deadly fire. But I held my line, gripping the controls as the Thunderbolt shuddered under rapid bursts of tracer rounds. The Talon was good, better than I expected. He outturned me in the tight spirals, forcing me to rely on the Jug's speed and power rather than any fancy flying. Then, remembering Sarah's words, I pulled back, climbing hard, pushing the massive engine to its limits. The Jug groaned but responded, soaring higher into the thinning air. Above 25,000 feet, the Talon's advantages began to fade. His sleek plane started to lose steam, while the Jug seemed to gather strength, its turbocharger humming like a beast waking from slumber. With a sudden roar, I pushed the throttle forward and dove. The earth blurred beneath me as the Jug transformed from lumbering giant to deadly missile. The Talon tried to pull away, but the Jug's dive speed was unmatched. I closed the distance fast. My fingers hit the trigger, and the 8.50 caliber machine guns unleashed a torrent of fire. The sky lit up with tracer rounds, and I saw the Talon's plane shudder under the assault. His wings wobbled, then smoke began to trail from the engine. For a moment, the world narrowed to the deafening roar of guns and the rush of wind. Then the Talon's Focke-Wulf spiraled down in a plume of black smoke. I pulled up sharply, heart pounding, and as I leveled off, a grin spread across my face. The Jug had prevailed. Back at base, Sarah was waiting, her eyes shining with pride. "Not bad, rookie. You just made yourself a legend." But as I climbed out of the cockpit, my smile faded. Somewhere deep inside the Jug's rumbling heart, I felt a new challenge stirring. The war was far from over, and the skies held secrets darker than any I'd faced so far. And then, a coded message arrived over the radio. One that hinted at a new weapon, one that could change everything. The war was about to turn again, and the Jug's true test was just beginning. The rain hammered down in relentless sheets as I trudged across the muddy airfield at RAF Lakenheath. The sky a roiling gray ceiling that mirrored the storm brewing inside me. After the encounter with the Black Talon, I thought I'd earned a moment's peace, but instead, the war had other plans. Orders came down that we were to support a daring new operation deep behind enemy lines. A low-level strike against a heavily fortified rail depot near the sleepy village of Rutland in East Anglia. The mission was a far cry from the high-altitude dogfights I'd grown used to. This was close, dirty, and dangerous. Flying just feet above the treetops, dodging ground fire and weaving through a maze of obstacles. The Jug, bulky and unwieldy at altitude, would have to prove its mettle in a new arena. As I approached my plane, Sarah was already there, hands smeared with grease, her usual teasing smile replaced by a look of fierce determination. Today, she wore a snug leather flight jacket over a simple white tee, with dark trousers tucked into scuffed combat boots. Her aviator goggles rested atop her tousled chestnut hair, which clung damp to her forehead from the unrelenting rain. "We're counting on you, Tom," she said quietly. "This isn't just any mission. If we pull this off, it could cripple the enemy's supply lines for months." I nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle over me like the cold rain. Climbing into the cockpit, I was struck by how different the interior felt from the last time. The armor plating seemed heavier somehow, the controls demanding more focus as I prepared for the low-level assault. The engines roared to life, a deep, growling promise of power as I taxied onto the slick runway. The other Thunderbolts followed suit, their pilots grim but resolute. We took off into the storm, the rain blurring the landscape beneath us as we descended to treetop level. Flying low was like threading a needle while riding a bull. The Jug's sheer size made it a handful, but its rugged construction was our shield. Bullets kicked up dirt and splintered branches around us as the enemy's anti-aircraft guns opened fire. The distinctive staccato bark of machine guns echoed through the cockpit. I kept my eyes peeled, weaving through the chaos, the throttle pushing the powerful engine to its limits. The ground rushed up fast, and the target loomed ahead. A sprawling rail yard packed with trains, warehouses, and fuel tanks. As we approached, the mission transformed from a flight to a thunderous assault. Bomb bays released their deadly cargo, and rockets streaked from under our wings, igniting the depot in a blazing inferno. The Jugs screamed overhead, trying to intercept us, but we had the element of surprise. Despite the fury of the anti-aircraft fire, the Jug's armored frame soaked up the punishment. I felt the plane shudder as rounds pinged off the fuselage, but it held firm, relentless as a battering ram. When I finally pulled up and away, the sight below was one of utter devastation. Burning wrecks, twisted rails, and the enemy's supply lifeline shattered. Back on the ground, Sarah was waiting, her face illuminated by the flickering light of the burning depot in the distance. She crossed her arms and smiled, though there was a flicker of worry in her eyes. "You made it back," she said softly. "That's all that matters." I looked at her, the rain washing away the grime and sweat from the day's battle. "The Jug's tougher than I thought," I admitted. "But I can't shake the feeling something bigger is coming." She nodded, stepping closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "There are whispers of a new German weapon. Something designed to take down even the toughest of our Thunderbolts. We're going to have to be ready, and fast." As the rain continued to fall, I realized that the Jug's legend was only beginning. The skies were darkening, and the next storm was about to break. But what no one knew yet was that the secret weapon lurking in the shadows would change everything, and test not just the Jug, but all of us to our limits. And somewhere, hidden in the chaos of war, a shadow moved, a figure whose identity could tip the balance of the skies forever. The dawn broke cold and clear over the rolling fields of Norfolk, the kind of morning that made you feel like the world had paused, just for a moment, before plunging back into chaos. I was back in the cockpit of my Jug, the hum of the Pratt and Whitney engine steady beneath me, when the call came through, urgent and clipped. Enemy fighters had been spotted near the coastal town of Great Yarmouth, and our squadron was scrambled to intercept. As we climbed into the pale morning light, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling settling in my gut. The Black Talon was still out there, and word was he wasn't the only ace sharpening his claws. But today, the skies held something else. A deadly game of cat and mouse was about to begin. The formation held tight as we approached the target area. The sea stretched out beneath us, a glistening mirror to the sky. Suddenly, the radio crackled. "Bandits breaking from cloud cover? 12 o'clock. I spotted them. Sleek silhouettes bursting from the mist like predators. The Luftwaffe came at us fast, their Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs slicing through the sky with lethal precision. The air erupted into a frenzy of tracer fire and roaring engines. I pushed the Jug into a steep climb, feeling the heavy plane respond with surprising agility at high altitude. The turbocharger whined as it spun the engine to life, giving me the edge I needed to stay with the nimble German fighters. But this wasn't about graceful dogfights, it was about survival. One enemy fighter peeled off, diving straight for me. I rolled the jug hard, feeling the G-forces press me into the seat. My fingers found the triggers, and the 8.50 caliber machine guns poured a wall of fire into the attacker's path. The tracer rounds stitched the sky, and the enemy plane wobbled, trailing smoke before spiraling earthward. The battle raged, but then a sharp shudder ran through my plane. A sudden jolt. A bullet had found its mark. I glanced down to see a streak of smoke curling from the left wing. The jug was wounded, but far from defeated. I gritted my teeth and pushed the throttle forward. The plane surged ahead, diving toward the patchwork fields below. Bullets pounded the fuselage, but the jug's armor held fast. The engine chugged stubbornly, refusing to quit. Behind me, the radio crackled with frantic voices. "Tom, you're hit. You need to break off." But retreat wasn't an option. The bombers we were escorting were still in danger, and I had a job to do. With a sudden burst of speed, I climbed back into formation, guns blazing, cutting through the enemy like a thunderbolt. The sky lit up with tracer fire, and one by one, the German fighters peeled away, unable to match our relentless assault. When the last bandit fled, leaving trails of smoke and fire, a hush fell over the squadron. The jug, battered but unbroken, had held the line. Back at base, the mechanics swarmed over my plane, marveling at the damage it had taken. Sarah was there, her hands flying over the controls as she checked every panel. "You're lucky to be alive," she said, her voice a mix of relief and awe. "This plane's got scars, but it's still a beast." I smiled, though exhaustion was creeping in. "She's tougher than I am." But as I stepped away, a shadow crossed her face. "Tom," she said quietly, "there's something you need to see." She led me to a small tent tucked away behind the hangar, where a group of officers huddled over a flickering map. On the table lay photographs, blurry images of a new German aircraft, unlike anything we'd seen before. Sleek, fast, and armed with weapons that could outmatch our Thunderbolts. "The Black Talon's not working alone anymore," one officer said grimly. "This new fighter could change the entire war." I stared at the photos, heart pounding. The jug had fought hard, but the war was evolving, and the next battle would demand everything we had. As I walked back into the fading light, the weight of what was coming settled over me like a storm cloud. The skies were about to get darker, and the jug's legend was far from finished. But somewhere, in the shadows of that new threat, lay a secret, one that could shatter everything we thought we knew about air combat. And I was determined to uncover it, no matter the cost. The evening air was thick with tension as I sat in the dimly lit briefing room at RAF Lakenheath, the low murmur of voices around me barely registering. The photographs of that mysterious German fighter, sleek, dark, and deadly, were still fresh in my mind. They called it the Shadow Hawk, a machine designed for speed, stealth, and lethal precision. If the rumors were true, it could outpace and outgun even the mighty jug. Captain Reynolds paced at the front, his face grim beneath the flickering overhead light. "We don't know much about this new aircraft, except that it's fast and heavily armed," he said. "Our orders are clear: intercept and neutralize. We can't afford to let this Shadow Hawk roam free." I leaned forward, my fingers tightening around the edge of the table. "What kind of weapons are we talking about?" I asked. "Experimental cannons with armor-piercing rounds," Reynolds replied. "The kind that can tear through even our thickest plating." Cold knot formed in my stomach. The jug's legendary toughness was its greatest strength, but how would it fare against this? Later that night, as I walked back to my quarters, the wind tugged at my flight jacket, carrying the faint scent of rain and fuel. I found Sarah waiting by the airfield, her eyes reflecting the distant runway lights. She handed me a steaming cup of tea, her fingers brushing mine briefly, a small comfort in the face of the unknown. "We've been running simulations," she said softly. "The Shadow Hawk's speed and firepower could outmatch us in a straight fight, but it doesn't have the jug's endurance or armor. We need to find a way to use that." I nodded, sipping the tea, feeling its warmth spread through me. "So, we hit it where it hurts. Force it into a battle of attrition." Sarah smiled, a spark of defiance in her eyes. Exactly. The Jug's not just a fighter. It's a fortress. If we play to its strengths, we can win. The next day, we took to the skies again, the Jug's engines roaring beneath me like a living thing. The mission was simple. Patrol the airspace near the Ardennes, a hotspot for enemy activity. But as we climbed through the clouds, a shadow flickered on the horizon. There it was, the Shadow Hawk. Its black silhouette cut through the sky with predatory grace, engines humming with deadly promise. The enemy pilot's eyes gleamed behind the canopy, cold and calculating. The battle that followed was unlike any I'd faced. The Shadow Hawk struck with lightning speed, weaving through the sky in a blur of motion. I pushed the Jug hard, its massive frame responding to every command, its guns roaring like thunder. Rounds tore through the air as the two planes danced a deadly dance, the Shadow Hawk's cannons ripping into the Jug's wing, sending sparks flying. But the Jug held firm, its armor absorbing the punishment. With a roar, I dove, using the Jug's weight and power to surge past the enemy. My guns unleashed a torrent of fire, and the Shadow Hawk shuddered, smoke trailing from its engine. The enemy pilot pulled up sharply, disappearing into the clouds. As I leveled off, heart pounding, I knew this was only the beginning. The Shadow Hawk was a formidable foe, but the Jug had proven its mettle once again. Back on the ground, Sarah met me with a fierce smile. "You're making history, Tom, but the war's changing fast. We'll need every advantage if we're going to survive." I looked out at the darkening sky, the distant rumble of thunder echoing the storm inside me. The Jug was a legend in the making, but the Shadow Hawk was a ghost in the machine, elusive, deadly, and waiting for its moment to strike. And as the night deepened, a new question settled over me like a shroud. Who was behind the Shadow Hawk's deadly design? And what secrets lay hidden in its black heart, waiting to be uncovered? The air was thick with anticipation as dawn crept over the rolling hills of Suffolk, casting long shadows across the airfield. Today marked a turning point. Intelligence had confirmed that the Shadow Hawk was more than just a terrifying prototype. It was part of a secret German program aimed at dominating the skies with a new breed of fighter. Our orders were clear: intercept at all costs. I ran my hands over the smooth metal fuselage of my Jug, its familiar bulk both reassuring and formidable. Beside me, Sarah moved with practiced ease, checking the engine and adjusting the gun sight with a precision born from countless hours in the hangar. She wore a fitted leather jacket that hugged her slender frame, the collar turned up against the chilly morning breeze. Her eyes, sharp and determined, met mine for a brief moment. "Ready to make history?" she asked, a playful edge to her voice that belied the tension in the air. "Ready as I'll ever be," I replied, climbing into the cockpit. The canopy slid shut with a satisfying hiss, sealing me inside the armored fortress. The engine roared to life, its deep growl vibrating through my bones like a heartbeat. We took off in formation, the squadron slicing through the pale sky en route to the coordinates where the Shadow Hawk had last been spotted. The radio crackled with updates, each one heightening the sense of urgency. Then, suddenly, the silence shattered. "Bandits at 12 o'clock high," came the sharp call. I looked up to see the sleek black silhouette emerging from a bank of clouds, moving with deadly purpose. The battle erupted like a storm. The Shadow Hawk darted and weaved with uncanny agility, its cannons spitting fire that rang against my Jug's armor. I pushed the throttle forward, the turbocharger screaming as we climbed higher, matching its speed. The dogfight was brutal, a clash of titans in the thin air above the English countryside. I felt the Thunderbolt shudder as rounds tore through the wingtip, but it held firm, refusing to yield. Using every ounce of skill and instinct, I maneuvered the Jug into a firing position, unleashing a hailstorm of .50 caliber bullets. The Shadow Hawk twisted sharply, but a burst caught its tailplane, sending it into a spiraling descent. As it plummeted, I caught a glimpse of the pilot, a young man with steely eyes and a grim expression. There was something familiar about him, a shadow of doubt flickering across his face before the plane crashed into the fields below. We circled above the crash site, wary of traps or reinforcements. The squadron leader ordered a cautious landing, and as we touched down, the reality of war settled over us like a heavy fog. Sarah was the first to reach the wreckage, her hands steady as she inspected the smoking remains. "We've just scratched the surface," she said quietly. "There's more to this than we know." Later, in the makeshift command tent, we pored over recovered documents and intercepted messages. The Shadow Hawk was part of a clandestine effort, a desperate gamble by the enemy to turn the tide with technology and terror. But beneath the technical schematics and battle plans, a deeper mystery emerged. Whispers of a traitor within our own ranks, someone feeding secrets to the enemy, cast a dark shadow over the squadron. That night, as I sat alone beneath the vast English sky, the weight of uncertainty pressed down on me. The Jug had won the battle, but the war was far from over. And now, more than ever, I had to ask myself, who could I trust when the enemy was not just in the skies, but possibly among us? The answer lay hidden in the shadows, waiting to be uncovered, before it was too late. The night was heavy with silence, broken only by the distant drone of engines and the occasional murmur from the guards patrolling the perimeter of our airfield near Cambridge. I sat alone in the dim glow of my quarters, the weight of the day pressing down on me like the thick English fog outside. The Jug sat patiently in its hangar, battered but unbowed, a steel sentinel waiting for the next call to battle. The discovery of the Shadow Hawk's secrets had shaken us all, but the whispers of a traitor were the poison that gnawed at my mind. Who among us could be feeding the enemy our strategies, our weaknesses? It was a question that haunted every glance, every conversation. Sarah had been unusually quiet since the briefing, her usual spark dimmed by worry. Earlier that evening, she pulled me aside, her voice barely above a whisper. "Tom, there are things going on that you don't know about. Orders coming down from higher up, things being swept under the rug. Someone doesn't want this traitor exposed." I frowned, the gears turning in my head. Why keep it secret? If there's a leak, we need to find them before more lives are lost. She shook her head. Because it's bigger than just us. The war isn't just fought in the skies. It's fought in shadows and secrets. And the people pulling the strings might be closer than we think. That night, sleep was a stranger. I found myself wandering the perimeter, the cold air biting at my skin. The hangars loomed like dark cathedrals, and the distant hum of aircraft engines was a constant reminder of the war raging overhead. Suddenly, a flicker of movement caught my eye near the edge of the field. I crept closer, heart pounding, and saw a shadow slip between the crates and tents. Without thinking, I called out, but the figure vanished into the darkness. The next morning, tensions were higher than ever. The squadron gathered for a briefing, but beneath the routine orders, an unspoken unease hung in the air. Captain Reynolds announced increased security measures and warned us to be vigilant. As I prepared for takeoff, Sarah approached, her eyes searching mine. "Be careful up there," she said softly. "The enemy isn't just in the sky." The mission was a patrol over the channel, but my mind was elsewhere. The weight of suspicion was like a storm cloud trailing me, threatening to break at any moment. As we soared above the patchwork of fields and coastline, the radio crackled with reports of enemy activity. Suddenly, a warning, "Bandits inbound, high speed," from the west. The Jug surged forward, and the battle erupted once again. Amidst the chaos, I couldn't shake the feeling that this fight was more than just against enemy pilots. It was against shadows, against betrayal. When the skirmish ended and the sky cleared, I realized something chilling. The traitor's actions had cost lives today, and unless we uncovered the truth soon, the Jug, and all of us, would pay the price. Back on the ground, as mechanics swarmed over the damaged planes, I caught Sarah's eye. There was a fire in her gaze, a determination that matched my own. "We're going to find them," I promised, "no matter what it takes." But as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the airfield, I knew the path ahead was fraught with danger, and that the war wasn't just fought with guns and planes, but with secrets and lies that could change everything. And somewhere, hidden in the darkness, the traitor watched, waiting for their next move. The gray dawn was breaking over the sprawling tarmac at RAF Lakenheath when the alarm bells shattered the fragile calm. We'd barely had time to sip our morning coffee before the call came. An urgent scramble. Recon had spotted a large formation of enemy fighters racing toward the heart of England, and we were the last line of defense. I strapped into the cockpit of my Jug, the familiar weight of the controls grounding me amidst the chaos. Sarah was already there, checking the squadron's radios with practiced efficiency, her sharp eyes scanning the horizon. She wore a fitted leather jacket zipped up against the chill, and a thin scarf fluttered around her neck. A small rebellion against the cold and the war. The engines thundered to life, and we roared down the runway, lifting into the sky as the sun pushed through the clouds. The wind whipped past the canopy, carrying the scent of fuel and the promise of battle. As we climbed, the radio buzzed with frantic reports. The enemy formation was massive, a cloud of black shapes blotting out the sun, their engines screaming a deadly chorus. Then, through the haze, I saw it, the Shadow Hawk, leading the charge like a phantom commander. Its sleek black silhouette was unmistakable, cutting through the sky with lethal grace. The dogfight erupted instantly. The air was torn apart by tracer fire, engines howling, and the sharp crack of cannon shells. I pushed the Jug to its limits, the turbocharger screaming as I climbed higher, dodging and weaving through a hailstorm of bullets. Suddenly, a searing pain jolted through the left wing. A cannon shell had slammed into the fuel tank, and smoke began to pour into the cockpit. The Jug was wounded, its powerful engine sputtering. But retreat was not an option. The bombers we were escorting depended on us, and the fate of the skies hung in the balance. With gritted teeth, I fought to keep control, diving toward the cloud cover to shake my pursuers. The Shadow Hawk was relentless, closing in with deadly precision. In a desperate gamble, I rolled the Jug hard, bringing every ounce of power to bear as I unleashed a torrent of machine gun fire. The Shadow Hawk shuddered, sparks flying from its wingtip. For a heartbeat, time seemed to freeze. Then the enemy fighter spiraled downward, trailing smoke and flames. The skies cleared, but the cost was high. The Jug was badly damaged, and several of our squadron mates had not returned. Back on the ground, as mechanics swarmed over the battered planes, Sarah met me with a fierce gaze. "You did what you had to do," she said, her voice steady despite the exhaustion. "But this war isn't over. Not by a long shot." I nodded, feeling the weight of the battle settle deep in my bones. The Jug had survived again, but the Shadow Hawk was still out there, a ghost haunting the skies. And beneath it all, the shadow of betrayal still loomed, a secret that could tear us apart from within. As night fell, I stood looking out over the airfield, the distant stars flickering like silent witnesses. The war was far from over, and the next move could come from anywhere, friend or foe. One thing was certain. The fight for the skies was about to reach its most dangerous chapter yet. And when it did, the Jug would have to be more than a flying fortress. It would have to be a symbol of hope and of vengeance. But as I turned away from the darkened runway, a final thought gnawed at me. What if the greatest enemy wasn't in the sky at all? The morning fog clung to the airfield like a shroud as I prepared for what felt like the most critical mission yet. The Jug, battle-scarred but unyielding, waited patiently beneath the hangar's looming shadow. Today, we were to strike at the heart of the enemy's secret weapon program, a hidden factory deep within the Black Forest region of Germany, where the Shadow Hawk and other terrifying new aircraft were born. Sarah was there beside me, her sharp eyes scanning the mission brief one last time. She wore a fitted flight suit that accentuated her lean frame, the zipper pulled down just enough to reveal a silver pendant resting against her collarbone. Her presence was a steadying force amid the storm of nerves and anticipation. "Ready to bring the fight to them?" she asked, a hint of steel beneath her usual warmth. I nodded, feeling the Jug's engine rumble beneath me like a coiled beast. This ends today. The flight out was tense and silent, the squadron cutting through the cold morning air with purpose. As we neared the target, the forested hills of southern Germany stretched out below, shadows playing among the trees like ghosts. Suddenly, the radio erupted. flak batteries opening up, tracer rounds streaking past our wings. The sky became a deadly gauntlet, but the Jug's armor proved its worth, shrugging off the punishment as we pressed on. When we reached the factory, the world exploded into fire and smoke. Bomb bays released their payloads, rockets screamed toward enemy hangars, and the Jug's guns tore through anti-aircraft positions. Amid the chaos, a familiar shape emerged, the Shadow Hawk, racing to defend its creator's lair. The final duel was brutal and unforgiving. The Shadow Hawk's speed and cunning clashed with the Jug's raw power and resilience. Each maneuver was a test of skill and will, the air thick with bullets and determination. Then, with a roar, I pushed the Jug into a steep dive, guns blazing. The Shadow Hawk faltered, smoke trailing from its engine as it spiraled toward the forest below. As the enemy plane crashed, the factory burned behind us, a symbol of a dark chapter brought to an end. Back at base, the squadron gathered in weary silence, the weight of victory tempered by the cost. Sarah approached, her eyes shining with pride and something deeper, a flicker of hope. "We did it," she said softly. "The Jug's legend is sealed." But as I looked out over the horizon, a chill ran down my spine. The war had been won in the skies above, but the shadows we'd uncovered hinted at darker threats yet to come. And somewhere, far from the burning ruins, a new force was stirring, one that would challenge everything we thought we knew. The Jug had triumphed, yes, but the story was far from over. Because in war, the greatest battles are often fought in silence, and the deadliest enemies wear the mask of friends. And as the sun set on that battlefield, I knew one thing for certain: the skies would never be the same again.